The rain started at 6, and by the time Natalie Brooks locked the clinic's front door, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. She stood under the awning, watching the downpour hammer the empty parking lot, her keys cutting into her palm. The last client had picked up their border collie an hour ago, and now the veterinary clinic sat dark behind her. All the animals settled for the night, and she was alone with that familiar tightness in her chest that always came when storms rolled in. 28 years old, a successful practice, a small apartment waiting 6 blocks away, and still she couldn't shake the feeling that rainy nights carved something hollow out of her. A figure moved near the corner of the building, and her heart kicked hard before she realized it was just someone seeking shelter from the downpour. He stepped closer to the light, and she got her first real look at him. White hair, impossibly white, fell past his shoulders in a way that should have looked absurd, but instead seemed deliberate, regal. His skin matched it, pale as moonlight, and when he glanced her way, his eyes were the color of dark wine. He wore a long coat that looked expensive, even drenched, and he moved with the kind of certainty that suggested he'd never doubted his place in the world for even a moment. "Terrible weather," she said, more to fill the silence than anything else. He turned fully toward her, and his gaze felt heavy, assessing. "Do you have far to go?" 6 blocks. I'll wait it out." She shifted her bag on her shoulder. "I hate being alone on rainy nights." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Too honest, the kind of confession that belonged to close friends and late-night wine, not strangers under an awning. She felt heat climb her neck, but he didn't laugh or look away uncomfortably. Instead, something shifted in his expression, a crack in that marble composure. "Then you should not be," he said simply. Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped out into the rain and was gone, moving through the storm like it couldn't touch him. Natalie stood there another 20 minutes, watching the water sheet down before she finally made the run to her car. She forgot about him by the time she got home, toweled off, and fell asleep to the sound of thunder. 3 days later, another storm rolled in just after sunset. Natalie was restocking the medication cabinet when she heard the front bell chime. She frowned because she'd locked up 15 minutes ago, but when she walked to the lobby, he was standing there, water beading on his coat, looking exactly as he had before. "You're closed," he said, as if he were reminding her of something she'd forgotten. "I am." She stopped several feet away, one hand still holding a bottle of antibiotics. "Did you need something?" "You said you hated being alone on rainy nights." The bottle almost slipped from her fingers. She set it carefully on the reception desk. "That was 3 days ago. How did you even remember that?" "I remember everything important." He said it without arrogance, just fact. "My name is Henrik Zarath. I wanted you to know, since I will be here again." "Here again," she repeated. "At my clinic, during storms." "Yes." The absurdity of it should have sent her reaching for her phone, should have triggered every safety protocol she'd ever learned. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'm Natalie, Natalie Brooks." He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that belonged to a different century. "I know. Your name is on the door." "Right." She laughed, short and startled. "Are you going to tell me why you're really here?" "I told you why." The next storm came 4 days later, in the middle of the afternoon, while she was in the middle of a complicated surgery on a German shepherd who'd eaten something he shouldn't have. Her assistant, Monica, poked her head into the surgical suite. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality people used when they thought you might be in trouble. "I'm kind of busy," Natalie said, not looking up from the incision. "He said his name is Henrik. He said he'd wait." Natalie's hands went still for half a second before she forced herself back into focus. "Tell him I'll be out when I'm finished." It took another 40 minutes to close. To make sure the shepherd was stable and comfortable in recovery, she scrubbed out, pulled off her surgical gown, and walked to the waiting room, still in her scrubs with her hair pulled back in a messy knot. Henrik sat in one of the plastic chairs, looking profoundly out of place, like a marble statue someone had accidentally delivered to a strip mall. Rain hammered the windows behind him. When he saw her, he stood. "You were working," he said. "Animals don't care about storms." She crossed her arms, aware of Monica watching from behind the reception desk with poorly disguised interest. "You really came back." "I said I would. People say a lot of things." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. "I am not people." The certainty in those words sent a strange thrill down her spine. She glanced at Monica, then back at Henrik. "I'll be done in an hour. If you want to wait." He waited. Through the last exam of the day, through her closing routine, through her locking up. This time when she stepped outside, he was there beside her, and his presence felt like a shield against the storm's fury. "I can drive you home," he said. "I have a car." "Then I will follow." And he did, though she never saw what he was driving. When she pulled into her apartment complex, he was simply there, walking her to her door through the rain, and when she hesitated on the threshold, he shook his head slightly. "I will not intrude," he said. "I only wanted to ensure you weren't alone. Not tonight." He left before she could formulate a response, disappearing into the downpour like he'd been conjured from it. The pattern continued through September into October. Every storm without fail, Henrik appeared. Sometimes at the clinic, sometimes at her apartment if the rain started after she got home. He never pushed for anything, never asked to come inside beyond the first step out of the weather. He simply existed beside her, this strange white-haired man who talked like he'd learned English from old books and moved like gravity worked differently for him. Natalie started checking the weather obsessively. She'd pull up the radar on her phone a dozen times a day, watching for the green and yellow blooms that meant rain. When a storm was forecast, her pulse would quicken, and she'd catch herself touching up her makeup, changing her shirt, doing all the small rituals of anticipation she hadn't done in years. "You're seeing someone," Monica announced one morning in late October, sorting through the day's appointment files. "I'm not." "You are. You've got that look. Also, you've checked your phone 6 times in the last 15 minutes, and there's a storm coming tonight." Monica grinned. "Is it that Henrik guy, the really pale one who dresses like a vampire prince?" Natalie's laugh came out higher than intended. "He's just a friend. A friend who shows up every single time it rains. That's some dedication." Monica's expression softened. "He seems good for you, whatever he is. You've been lighter lately." Had she? Natalie turned the thought over as she prepped for her first appointment. Maybe she had been. The rainy nights she'd dreaded for so long had transformed into something else entirely. Something she looked forward to with an intensity that probably wasn't healthy. She'd started falling asleep easier when storms rolled through, knowing Henrik was somewhere close, keeping his strange vigil. She was falling for him. The realization settled over her during a routine exam on a tabby cat, simple and undeniable as the animal's heartbeat under her stethoscope. She was falling for a man she knew almost nothing about, who appeared and disappeared like a ghost, who never touched her beyond the occasional steadying hand on her elbow, who watched her with eyes that held centuries of sadness she couldn't begin to understand. That night's storm came with high winds that rattled the clinic's windows. Natalie finished up early, nervous energy making it impossible to focus on paperwork. When she locked the front door, Henrik was already there, leaning against the brick wall with rain streaming past him on either side. "You're early," she said. "The storm is strong tonight. I didn't want you to worry." "I don't worry when you're here." The admission came easy, too easy. "That's the problem, isn't it? I should probably worry more about the mysterious man who stalks me during thunderstorms." His expression shuddered. "If my presence disturbs you, I can stop." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "No, that's not what I meant. She stepped closer, into the space where the awning kept the rain at bay. "Who are you, Henrik? Really?" He studied her for a long moment, and she watched something like conflict play out behind those wine-dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Someone who understands what it means to be too late." "Too late for what?" "For everything that matters." The pain in those words made her chest ache. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his wrist, and his skin was cold even through the fabric of his sleeve. He went perfectly still under her touch, as if she'd cast a spell. "You're always on time for me," she said quietly. He exhaled, a sound like he'd been holding his breath for a very long time. "That is the intention." They stood there while the storm raged around them, her hand on his wrist, his gaze locked on her face like she was something precious and breakable. Finally, Natalie forced herself to step back. "Come upstairs," she said. "Please, just for a little while." She'd expected him to refuse like he always did. Instead, he nodded once and followed her to her car. Her apartment was small but comfortable, full of secondhand furniture she'd collected over the years and photos of the animals she'd saved. Henrik moved through the space with that same eerie grace, taking in every detail, and she felt suddenly self-conscious about the pile of mail on the counter and the blanket thrown haphazardly over the couch. "It's not much," she started, but he shook his head. It's warm. It feels like you. He paused near the window, watching the rain sheet down the glass. This is kind of you. Letting you out of the storm. That's basic decency. No, trusting me enough to invite me into your home. He turned to face her. You should not trust so easily. Maybe. She kicked off her shoes, moved to the kitchen to put on water for tea. But you've had a dozen chances to hurt me and you haven't. That has to count for something. I would sooner die. The intensity of the statement stopped her cold. She looked at him across the small space, at the way he stood so still, his hands loose at his sides, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. Henrik, she said slowly, what are you? She'd suspected for weeks in that part of her mind that still believed in fairy tales and monsters. The impossible paleness, the way he moved, the fact that she'd never seen him during daylight. All of it pointed to something beyond normal, beyond human, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. He didn't flinch from the question. I think you already know. Tell me anyway. I am what your stories call vampire. King of Ravensworth, a realm that exists beneath and beside your world. I am 537 years old, and I have not been late to anything that mattered in 3 centuries. His voice remained steady, but she heard the weight of confession in it. Not since the night I arrived too late to save someone I loved and found them gone in the ruins of a storm. The kettle began to whistle. Natalie turned off the heat with shaking hands, her mind racing to catch up with what he'd just told her. Vampire, king, 500 years old. The words should have sounded insane, should have sent her running for the door, but instead, they settled into place like puzzle pieces she'd been trying to force together for months. That's why you come, she said. Every storm. You're trying to make up for the one where you were late. I cannot be late again. I will not. He moved closer, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. That first night, when you said you hated being alone in the rain, I heard an echo of her voice. The woman I lost. She said something similar once, and I dismissed it as nothing important. I was arrogant. I thought I had time. His hands curled into fists. I will never make that mistake again. Natalie's heart twisted with a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't fully name. Compassion, because the grief in his voice was raw even after 300 years. Confusion, because she still didn't understand why he'd chosen her, a stranger, to be the recipient of this devotion. And underneath it all, a growing unease she couldn't quite articulate. So you've been watching over me because I remind you of her? No, he said it fiercely. You are nothing like Isolde. She was gentle where you are strong, quiet where you speak your mind. But the loneliness was the same, and I recognized it. I recognized the danger of leaving it unattended. I'm not in danger, Henrik. I'm just lonely sometimes. That's not the same as being at risk of... She stopped, because she didn't actually know what had happened to Isolde, only that Henrik blamed himself for not preventing it. She took her own life, he said quietly, answering the question she hadn't asked. During a storm, while I was attending to kingdom matters I deemed more important. She told me 100 times she struggled when she was alone, and I thought my love would be enough to sustain her between visits. I was wrong. The air went out of Natalie's lungs. She set down the kettle she had been clutching and moved around the counter, closing the distance between them. Henrik, I'm so sorry. I don't want your pity. I want your safety, your happiness. He looked down at her, and his eyes were infinite and sad. I want to never be too late again. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the marble coolness of his skin, the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. You can't live your whole life trying to undo one terrible night. I can try. But what about the nights when it doesn't rain? The question came from somewhere deep, a place she hadn't fully examined until now. What about the clear days, the sunny afternoons, the calm evenings? Do I only matter to you when there's a storm? He stared at her like she'd struck him. That is not, isn't it? She dropped her hands, took a step back. You appear every single time it rains. Without fail. But I never see you otherwise. You've never called to ask how I'm doing, never suggested we meet for coffee or dinner or anything normal people do. You're vigilant during storms and absent the rest of the time. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. I don't want to be your penance, Henrik. I don't want to be the stand-in for someone you couldn't save. The words hung between them, sharp and true. Henrik's expression shattered, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked lost. I never meant... He stopped, seemed to gather himself. You're right. I have been using you as a way to rewrite history, to prove to myself that I have changed. That is not fair to you. No, it's not. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the apartment's warmth. I've been falling in love with you, and you've been haunted by a ghost. Those aren't the same thing. His eyes widened. You love me? I'm getting there. Or I was. She forced herself to meet his gaze. But I need to know that when you look at me, you see me, Natalie, not a second chance or a way to atone, just me. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rain hammering against the window. Henrik stood perfectly still, and she could almost see him processing, working through centuries of guilt and habit to find something real underneath. Finally, he spoke. I don't know if I can separate those things. The guilt is woven into everything I am now. Then you should go. It hurt to say it, hurt worse than she'd expected, but she kept her voice steady. Because I deserve someone who comes to me out of joy, not obligation. Someone who wants to be with me on clear nights too, not just as a storm sentinel. He flinched at that, and she knew her words had found their mark. For a long moment, she thought he might argue, might try to convince her she was wrong. Instead, he inclined his head in that old-fashioned way she'd come to recognize. You deserve far more than I have given you, he said quietly. I am sorry, Natalie Brooks. I will honor your wishes. Then he was moving toward the door, and panic seized her chest because this wasn't what she wanted. Not really. But before she could call him back, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with terrible finality. Natalie stood in her empty apartment, listening to the storm rage outside, and realized she'd never felt more alone on a rainy night in her entire life. The next storm came 5 days later. Natalie told herself she wasn't waiting for him, wasn't watching the parking lot through the clinic window like some tragic figure from a romance novel. She had patients to see, animals to heal, a life that existed independent of mysterious vampire kings and their guilt complexes. But when the rain started and the sky turned dark, she couldn't stop herself from looking. He didn't come. She locked up alone, drove home alone, spent the evening curled on her couch with a book she couldn't focus on while thunder rumbled overhead. He didn't come, and the hollow space in her chest yawned wider with every passing hour. This was what she'd asked for, she reminded herself. This was her setting boundaries, demanding better, refusing to be someone's second chance. This was healthy and right and absolutely miserable. The storm after that, she forced herself not to look. She kept her eyes on her work, her phone face down on the counter, her attention anywhere but the doors or windows. Monica gave her concerned looks that she ignored. When she got home, she made dinner and ate it mechanically, then climbed into bed early with the rain drumming against the roof. She'd almost managed to fall asleep when her phone rang. Unknown number. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Natalie Brooks? The voice was female, crisp with authority. My name is Elena Zarath. I'm Henrik's sister. Natalie sat up so fast her head spun. Is he okay? That depends on your definition. A pause. He's alive, if that's what you're asking. But he's been insufferable for the past week, and I've had quite enough of it. I'm calling to invite you to Ravensworth. To where? Our realm. The vampire kingdom Henrik rules. It exists beneath your city, accessible through certain passages known only to our kind. Elena's tone suggested she was explaining something painfully obvious. He won't come to you because you told him not to, and his sense of honor is annoyingly absolute. But he's been standing in the rain outside his study for 3 hours watching storm coverage of your neighborhood. And if I have to endure 1 more minute of his melodramatic suffering, I will lose my mind. Despite everything, Natalie felt her lips twitch toward a smile. He's been standing in the rain? Like some tragic figure from a bad romance novel. It's humiliating for all of us. Elena sighed. Look, I don't make a habit of involving myself in my brother's personal affairs, but you should know something. Henrik hasn't let himself feel anything real since Isolde died. He's been going through the motions of ruling, of existing, but there's been no life in him. Then he met you, and suddenly he's present again. Arguing with the council, making jokes, actually eating at dinner instead of just sitting there like a statue. I told him I wouldn't be his penance, Natalie said quietly. And you were right too. But I think you misunderstand what you've become to him. Elena's voice gentled slightly. Isolde was his past, his first great failure. You're something else entirely. You're the first person in 300 years who's made him think about the future. Natalie's throat tightened. He told me he couldn't separate the guilt from how he feels about me. Because he's an idiot. A well-meaning, honor-bound idiot, but still an idiot. A rustling sound, like Elena was moving through rooms. I'm sending you an address. Be there at sunset tomorrow. There's a door black, unmarked, in an alley between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. Knock 3 times. Someone will escort you down. And if I don't come, then my brother will continue standing in the rain like a gargoyle, and I'll have to stage a coup just to get competent leadership back. Please don't make me do that. Coups are exhausting. The call ended before Natalie could respond. A moment later, a text came through with an address on the east side of the city. She stared at it for a long time, her thumb hovering over the delete button. She should ignore this. She'd set her boundary, made her position clear. Going to Henrik's realm felt like backsliding, like letting herself be drawn back into something that might hurt her again. But Elena's words kept echoing in her head. The first person in 300 years who's made him think about the future. Natalie put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain, and started counting down the hours until sunset. The alley was exactly where Elena had described, tucked between businesses in a part of town Natalie rarely visited. The black door was easy to miss, unmarked and unremarkable except for the heavy iron knocker shaped like a raven. She knocked 3 times as the sun touched the horizon. The door opened immediately, revealing a tall woman with the same white hair and pale skin as Henrik, though her eyes were ice blue rather than wine dark. She wore a gown that looked medieval, all flowing fabric and intricate embroidery, and she assessed Natalie with a single sweeping glance. "You came," she said. "Good. I'm Elena. Try not to look terrified. We're quite civilized these days." "These days," Natalie repeated faintly, "comparatively speaking." Elena stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Welcome to Ravensworth." The doorway opened onto a spiral staircase that descended much farther than should have been possible. Stone walls pressed close, lit by torches that burned with steady blue flames. Natalie followed Elena down and down until the air grew cool and still and smelled faintly of old earth and older magic. When they finally reached the bottom, Natalie stepped into another world entirely. The vampire realm spread out before her like something from a dream. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by pillars carved with intricate designs. Buildings made of white stone rose in elegant tiers, connected by bridges and walkways. Everything glowed with soft light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, and vampires moved through the streets below with that same uncanny grace Henrik possessed. "It's beautiful," Natalie breathed. "It's home." Elena started down a wide avenue. Henrik's study is in the palace. That's the large structure ahead, the one that looks like someone decided a Gothic cathedral and a fortress should have a child. Despite her nerves, Natalie smiled. "Is everyone in your family this sarcastic?" "Survival mechanism. When you live for centuries, you either develop a sense of humor or go mad. Sometimes both." Elena glanced at her sidelong. "You're handling this remarkably well." "I'm a veterinarian. I'm used to adapting to strange situations." Natalie dodged a vampire who swept past carrying an armload of scrolls, though this is definitely the strangest. The palace was even more impressive up close, all soaring towers and stained glass windows that depicted battles and coronations in jewel tones. Elena led her through massive doors, down corridors lined with portraits of severe-looking vampires, until they reached a set of double doors guarded by 2 males in elaborate armor. "The king is not to be disturbed," one of them said. "I'm his sister. I'll disturb him if I please." Elena pushed past them and shoved open the doors. "Henrik, stop being pathetic. You have a visitor." The study was enormous, lined floor to ceiling with books, maps, and artifacts that looked older than history. Rain lashed against tall windows, and standing in front of them, silhouetted against the storm, was Henrik. He turned, and his expression cycled through surprise, hope, and something that looked like pain in rapid succession. "Natalie, I'll leave you 2 alone," Elena said cheerfully. "Try not to waste this, brother. I won't interfere again." She left, pulling the doors closed behind her, and suddenly Natalie was alone with Henrik in a vampire palace beneath the city, while a storm raged overhead that he couldn't answer. "You came," he said, his voice rough. "Your sister is very persuasive." Natalie moved deeper into the room, taking in the controlled chaos of papers and books spread across a massive desk. She said, "You've been standing in the rain." "I have not been handling your absence well." "Good." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I haven't been handling it well either." He moved toward her, then stopped himself, hands clenching at his sides. "I have spent the past week trying to understand what you asked of me, to see you clearly, without the weight of past failures, to come to you out of joy rather than guilt. And I realized I don't know how." He looked away, jaw tight. "The guilt is so deeply embedded, I don't know who I would be without it. It has driven every decision I've made for 3 centuries. It has made me careful, cautious, vigilant. It has made me the king Ravensworth needs." "But what about what you need?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What I need is irrelevant." "No, it's not." She closed the distance between them, refusing to let him retreat. "You're not just a king, Henrik. You're a person. You're allowed to want things for yourself. You're allowed to be happy." "I don't know if I remember how." The admission broke her heart. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his, feeling the coldness of his skin slowly warm where they touched. "Then let me remind you. Let me teach you how to come to me on clear nights when there's nothing to guard against except the possibility of joy." He stared down at their joined hands, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That I'll fail you too. That my presence will become a burden rather than a comfort. That I'll be too late when it matters most." He finally met her eyes, and the vulnerability there stole her breath. "That I'll lose you the way I lost her." "Henrik," she brought her free hand up to his face, making him look at her. "You can't control everything. You can't prevent every possible tragedy by sheer force of will. Sometimes terrible things happen, and sometimes we're powerless to stop them. But you can't live in fear of loss forever. I don't know how to do anything else. So learn, with me." She rose on her toes, bringing their faces close. "Come to me tomorrow night. Not because there's a storm, but because you want to see me. Take me to dinner somewhere normal, somewhere humans go. Talk to me about things that have nothing to do with protecting your vigilance or making up for the past. Just be with me. And if I fail, if I cannot separate the compulsion to guard from genuine affection, then we'll figure it out together, but you have to try." She held his gaze, willing him to understand. "I meant what I said before. I'm falling in love with you, the real you, not the guilt-ridden ghost who appears during storms. I want to know who Henrik Zerath is when he's not haunted. I want to see you smile because something made you happy, not because you're relieved another storm passed without incident. I want all of you, but you have to want that too." For a long moment, he was silent. Then, slowly, he brought his free hand up to cover hers, where it rested against his face. His eyes closed, and she felt him tremble. "I want that," he whispered, "more than I have wanted anything in 300 years. Then prove it. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, pick me up at my apartment and we'll start over, properly this time." His eyes opened, and something in them had shifted, like clouds parting to let through light. "I will be there. Not because you have to, because you want to. Because I want to," he repeated, testing the words. Then with more certainty, "Because I want to." She leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, feeling his sharp inhale, the way his whole body went still like he was trying to memorize the sensation. When she pulled back, something like wonder had replaced the constant vigilance in his expression. "I should go," she said, "but I'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, and this time it sounded like a promise rather than an obligation. Elena was waiting outside the study, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and a knowing expression. "Well?" "Well, you might not have to stage that coup after all. Thank the ancients. I really wasn't looking forward to the paperwork." Elena pushed off the wall and started back down the corridor. "For what it's worth, you're good for him. I haven't seen him this unsettled in centuries, and unsettled is infinitely better than the empty calm he's been living in." "You really love him," Natalie said. "He's my brother. He held Ravensworth together through 3 wars and a plague that nearly wiped out our kind. He's earned the right to be happy, even if he's forgotten how to reach for it." Elena glanced at her, Don't let him hide behind duty again. He'll do it without thinking if you let him. I won't. They emerged back into the rainy alley 40 minutes later, and Natalie stood for a moment, letting the reality of where she'd been sink in. An entire world beneath the city, full of empires and magic, and a king who'd stood in the rain mourning her absence. She drove home with her heart pounding and fell asleep wondering what tomorrow would bring. Henrik arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. Natalie opened the door to find him standing in her hallway wearing dark jeans and a fitted shirt that managed to look both casual and elegant. His white hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the sharp lines of his face. No storm raged outside. The evening was perfectly clear, stars just beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Hi," she said, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been in his realm. "Hello." He held out a bouquet of flowers she didn't recognize, petals that shimmered between silver and blue. "These grow in Ravensworth. They bloom in darkness and smell like rain. I thought you might like them." She took them carefully, brought them to her nose, and breathed in the scent of petrichor and something sweeter. "They're beautiful. Thank you." "You're beautiful." He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I should have said that before, many times before. You can make up for it now." She set the flowers in water, grabbed her jacket, and stepped into the hall with him. "Where are we going?" "There's an Italian restaurant 3 blocks from here. I called ahead to make sure they could accommodate us. Is that acceptable?" "Completely acceptable." She fell into step beside him, hyper aware of how close he walked, the way his hand occasionally brushed hers as they moved. "Have you eaten Italian food before?" "Not in this century. Cuisine has changed somewhat since the 1700s. They walked through the cooling evening, past couples and families and the ordinary chaos of the city, and Henrik looked around with something like curiosity rather than his usual vigilance. When they reached the restaurant, he held the door for her, and the hostess led them to a quiet corner table lit by candles. "This is nice," Natalie said, studying the menu. "Very normal." "Is that good?" "It's perfect." She looked at him over the menu. "Tell me something about you that has nothing to do with being a king or protecting people or storms." He considered the question while the waiter took their drink orders. When they were alone again, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I used to paint. Before Isolde, before I took the throne. I was actually quite good." "Really? What did you paint?" "Landscapes, mostly. The realm has places of extraordinary beauty that humans never see. Caverns where crystals grow like forests, underground rivers that glow with phosphorescence. I tried to capture them." His expression softened with memory. "I haven't picked up a brush in 300 years. "Why not?" "It felt frivolous, self-indulgent. I had a kingdom to run and guilt to carry. There wasn't room for something as simple as art." Natalie reached across the table and took his hand. "Maybe it's time to make room." The dinner stretched into hours. They talked about everything and nothing: her work at the clinic, his responsibilities in Ravensworth, the strange overlap between the human and vampire worlds. He made her laugh with dry observations about council politics, and she told him stories about the animals she treated, the strange things people brought in, the small victories that made her job worthwhile. He was different like this, away from storms and obligations. Lighter somehow, though that word didn't quite fit someone who still carried centuries of grief. But there were moments when his smile came easier, when his laugh sounded genuine rather than polite, when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. "I like this," she said, as they shared dessert, some elaborate chocolate creation that seemed almost too pretty to eat. "This version of you." "This is still me, just a part I'd forgotten existed." "Well, I'm glad you're remembering." They left the restaurant near 10, stepping out into a clear night that smelled like autumn and city life. Henrik walked her home slowly, like he was reluctant for the evening to end, and when they reached her building, he paused before pulling open the door. "May I see you again? Tomorrow, if you're free, or the day after, or any day you'll have me." "Tomorrow," she said, warmth spreading through her chest. "Come by the clinic when I close. We can grab dinner again, or just walk, or sit on my couch and watch terrible television. Whatever sounds good." "All of that sounds good." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Thank you, Natalie, for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing up. Really showing up, not just standing guard. She kissed him then, quick and soft, just a brush of lips that tasted like chocolate and promise. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened to the color of midnight wine, and his hand came up to cup her face like she was something precious. I will dream of that, he murmured. Do vampires dream? This one will. He waited until she was inside and up the stairs before he left, and Natalie fell asleep with a smile on her face for the first time in weeks. The pattern they'd established during storms transformed into something new. Henrik came to her every evening, storm or shine, arriving after sunset with that same reliability, but for entirely different reasons. They fell into an easy rhythm, dinners and walks, quiet evenings in her apartment where she introduced him to modern cinema and he told her stories about vampire history that sounded like fairy tales. He started painting again. She came home one evening to find him in her apartment, having let himself in with the key she'd given him the week before, with canvases spread across her living room floor and paint on his hands. He looked almost embarrassed when she walked in. I hope you don't mind. I was inspired. She stared at the paintings. They were extraordinary, luminous landscapes of places that couldn't exist in the human world, all glowing rivers and crystal formations and impossible beauty. But among them were new pieces, different from the others. Her clinic at sunset, the view from her apartment window, her profile as she slept rendered in shades of blue and silver. Henrik, she breathed, these are incredible. You gave this back to me. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. This part of myself I thought was dead. You keep giving me pieces back. She walked to him and kissed him properly, deeply, tasting the joy that had been growing in him over the past weeks. He responded with a hunger that surprised her, his arms coming around her waist to pull her close, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Stay tonight, she said. Not in the living room, with me. His eyes searched hers. Are you certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He stayed. They made love slowly, learning each other with careful hands and whispered words, and afterward, he held her against his chest while she traced the planes of his face in the darkness. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was afraid saying it would make it feel like obligation. But it's not. It's joy and terror and wanting and need, and none of it has anything to do with storms or guilt or the past. I love you too. She pressed a kiss to his collarbone. All of you? The vigilant protector and the artist and the king and the man who makes terrible puns about vampire politics. They're not terrible. They're sophisticated. They're awful, and I adore them. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest, and she felt him relax in a way she'd never witnessed before, like he'd finally given himself permission to be happy. The first storm after that night came in November, a cold rain that lashed the city and turned the streets to mirrors. Natalie was finishing up at the clinic when she felt the familiar anticipation rise in her chest, that old instinct that said Henrik would appear any moment. But he didn't come. She locked up and drove home through the downpour, and when she opened her apartment door, he was there in the kitchen making dinner, paint still smudged on his jaw from whatever he'd been working on that afternoon. He looked up and smiled when she walked in. Terrible weather, he said, echoing her words from that first night months ago. You didn't come to the clinic. She set down her bag, studying his face. There is a storm. I know. He turned back to the stove, stirring something that smelled incredible. But you weren't alone. I called Monica earlier to confirm you had company until closing. Natalie felt her throat tighten. You didn't feel like you had to come. I wanted to be here instead, waiting for you, making you dinner. He glanced at her, and she saw the old uncertainty flicker across his face. Is that wrong? Should I have... She crossed to him in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his back. It's perfect. It's exactly right. She felt him relax, his free hand coming up to cover hers where they rested against his stomach. I'm learning it's not always easy, but I'm learning to choose joy over vigilance, to trust that terrible things won't happen just because I let my guard down for a moment. I'm proud of you. They ate dinner together while the storm raged outside, and Natalie realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the rain, not of being alone, not of loving someone who'd been broken and was slowly healing. They were both learning, both growing into something new. After dinner, Henrik pulled her onto the couch and they sat tangled together, watching the rain stream down the windows. His fingers traced patterns on her arm, idle and content. "I spoke with Elena yesterday," he said. "About succession." Natalie stilled. "Succession? I am immortal, but I need not rule forever. There are others who could take the throne, who want it even." He shifted so he could see her face. "I have been king for 400 years. Perhaps it's time to step back, to let someone else carry that burden for a while." "You'd give up being king?" "I would delegate more, take an extended leave. I have not had a true rest in centuries." His hand came up to cup her face. "I want time, Natalie. Time to paint and travel and learn who I am beyond duty. Time with you without the weight of a crown making every decision for me." "What would you do?" "I thought I might go back to school, medicine perhaps, or art history." He said it carefully, like he was testing the idea out loud. "I could work in the human world, build a life that bridges both realms. I could be more than the vigilant protector for once." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "You've really thought about this?" "I think about you constantly, about the future we could have." He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "I don't want to waste another 300 years trapped in the past. I want to live with you." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They kissed as thunder rolled overhead, and this time the storm was just weather, not a summons or a reminder. Just rain falling on a city full of people living their lives, including two who'd found each other in the midst of it and decided to build something lasting. 6 months later, Natalie woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she was disoriented, then memory returned and she stretched languidly, feeling the ache of a long night in the best possible way. They'd moved in together a month ago, finding a house on the edge of the city that had enough space for Henrik's studio and her home office, with the yard that backed onto woods where they could walk in the evenings. It was perfect, full of light during the day and shadow at night, straddling both their worlds. Henrik was already up, which wasn't unusual. He'd developed a habit of waking before her to paint in the morning light he could now tolerate thanks to a charm Elena had helped him commission. Something about vampire magic and expensive enchantments she didn't fully understand but was deeply grateful for. She found him in the studio standing in front of a canvas nearly as tall as he was. He'd paint on his hands and was wearing the old shirt she'd given him specifically for this purpose, his white hair pulled back messily. "Morning," she said from the doorway. He turned, and his face lit up in a way that never failed to make her heart skip. "Good morning. Did I wake you?" "No, but you should have. We could have had breakfast together." "I was inspired." He gestured at the canvas. "What do you think?" She moved closer, studying the painting. It showed their house at sunset, warm light spilling from the windows, and two figures visible through the glass. One dark-haired and human, one pale and otherworldly, their silhouettes intertwined in what might have been an embrace or a dance. "It's us," she said softly. "It's home." He set down his brush and pulled her against him, heedless of the paint. "Every time I paint you, paint us, I'm reminded of how close I came to missing this, to letting guilt keep me trapped. But you didn't. You took the risk. You made it worth taking." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Elena approved the final succession documents yesterday. I'm officially on extended leave as of next month." "Are you nervous?" "Terrified and exhilarated. I start at the university in the fall. They've accepted my application to the art history program." He laughed, the sound still slightly disbelieving. "I'm going to be a student again at 538 years old. You'll be the most qualified student they've ever had, or the most insufferable, according to Elena." They spent the morning together, cooking breakfast side by side, and afterward walked into town to run errands. It was such an ordinary thing, grocery shopping and picking up supplies from the hardware store, but Natalie cherished it. These simple moments felt like victories, proof that they'd built something real and lasting. That evening, after dinner, Henrik led her out to the back porch. The sky was cloudless, stars just beginning to emerge in the twilight, and he'd set up candles and blankets to make the space comfortable. "What's all this?" she asked. "I realized something yesterday. He drew her down to sit beside him, their backs against the house, looking out at the darkening woods. We've been together nearly a year now, and I have been to you in storms and sun, on good days and terrible ones. But we've never just sat together under a clear sky with nowhere to be and nothing urgent demanding our attention. She leaned her head on his shoulder. This is nice. This is overdue. He was quiet for a moment, and she felt tension creep into his frame. There is something I need to tell you. Her stomach tightened. Okay. I spoke with the council last week. I asked them about the ritual. Natalie sat up straighter. They'd discussed this before, late at night when she couldn't sleep and he held her in the darkness. The ritual that could transform a human into a vampire, granting immortality and all the complications that came with it. He'd told her it was dangerous, that many didn't survive, and she'd shelved the conversation as something to revisit later. Henrik, I'm not asking you to decide now or even soon. He took her hands in his. But I want you to know that if you choose it, I will support you. And if you choose not to, I will love you for however many years we have and count myself blessed for every single one. His voice roughened. I will not lose you the way I lost Isolde. But I have learned that loss comes whether we prepare for it or not. What matters is that we live fully in the time we have. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what I want. Immortality sounds terrifying and lonely. It can be both. But it doesn't have to be. He brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. Elena would become your sister. Our court would become your family. You would have centuries to pursue every dream, to help countless animals to see the world change and grow. And you would have me for as long as you wanted me. Forever, she said fiercely. I'd want you forever. Then we have time to decide. Years, if you need them. I just wanted you to know the option exists and that whatever you choose, we'll face it together. She kissed him until the stars fully emerged, until the candles burned down to stumps, until she was breathless and certain. Ask me again in a year, on our anniversary. I'll have an answer then. I'll wait as long as you need. They stayed on the porch until late, wrapped in blankets and each other, talking about the future in ways that felt possible rather than frightening. Henrik told her about the places he wanted to take her vampire cities and other countries. Hidden realms beneath famous landmarks, places of beauty she couldn't imagine. She told him about her dreams of expanding the clinic, maybe opening a shelter for strays, projects that would take years to accomplish properly. Everything felt infinite and immediate all at once, and when they finally went inside, Natalie looked back at the clear night sky and felt only contentment. No storms waiting, no loneliness lurking, just possibility stretching out ahead of them like an open road. The year passed in a blur of seasons and changes. Henrik started university and came home full of stories about his professors and classmates, most of whom had no idea they were debating art history with someone who'd lived through half the periods they studied. Natalie expanded the clinic, hiring 2 more vets and opening a small rescue operation that quickly became her favorite part of the work. They traveled when they could a week in Paris, where Henrik showed her vampire galleries hidden beneath the Louvre, a long weekend in Prague where the realm was so extensive it had its own cathedral. Everywhere they went, she saw both worlds overlapping, the human and the vampire coexisting in careful balance. Elena visited often, usually with some excuse about checking on Henrik, but clearly just wanting to spend time with them. She and Natalie had become genuinely close, and more than once Natalie found herself thinking about what Henrik had said. Elena would become your sister. The thought was less frightening than it once had been. Their anniversary fell on a Wednesday in September, exactly 1 year from the night they had officially started over. Henrik insisted on taking her somewhere special, and he wouldn't tell her where no matter how much she wheedled. They drove for 2 hours into the mountains, taking increasingly remote roads until they pulled up to a cabin that looked like something from a storybook. It was small but elegant, all dark wood and large windows perched on the edge of a cliff with a view that stretched for miles. I bought it last month, Henrik said as he helped her out of the car. I thought we could use a place that's just ours. Away from the city, away from both our worlds. Somewhere to retreat when everything gets overwhelming. It's perfect, she breathed, taking in the surrounding forest and the distant mountains painted purple by the setting sun. Inside was even better, a fireplace already lit, a kitchen stocked with her favorite foods, and a bedroom with a massive bed covered in soft blankets. He'd thought of everything, down to the flowers on the table that matched the ones he'd given her on their first real date. They ate dinner on the porch as the sun set, not talking much, just being together in the comfortable silence they'd developed. When full dark fell and the stars emerged brilliant and clear, Henrik took her hand. 1 year ago, you asked me to choose joy over guilt, to come to you on clear nights, not just during storms. He stood, drawing her up with him. You gave me my life back, Natalie. You made me remember what it means to live rather than just exist. You did the same for me. I was so lonely before you, and I didn't even realize how much until I wasn't anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Natalie's breath caught. I'm not asking about the ritual. Not yet. He opened the box to reveal a ring, white gold, with a deep red stone that seemed to hold starlight. I'm asking if you'll marry me. Human wedding, human ceremony, in front of everyone we love from both worlds. I want to be your husband before anything else. I want that commitment, that promise, regardless of what comes after. Yes. She was crying, laughing, holding out her hand so he could slide the ring on. Yes, of course, yes. He kissed her desperately, joyfully, and she could feel him trembling. When they broke apart, she cupped his face in her hands. And for what it's worth, I've made my decision about the other thing too. His eyes widened. Natalie, you don't have to. I want to. Not now, not immediately, but someday when we've been married a few years and I've accomplished some more goals in the human world, I want to try. I want forever with you, Henrik. All the forevers we can get. He pulled her close, sparing his face and her hair, and she felt wetness on his cheeks that might have been tears. I will make sure you never regret it. I know you will. They stayed at the cabin for 3 days, existing in a bubble of happiness and plans. They talked about the wedding, something small and intimate, mixing vampire and human traditions. They talked about the timing of the ritual, agreeing that 5 years felt right, enough time for her to feel ready, to prepare to make peace with leaving her mortal life behind. Mostly, though, they just existed together. Walking in the woods, cooking elaborate meals, making love under the clear night sky on the porch. They talked and laughed and built a future with their words, and Natalie felt more certain of her choices with every passing hour. On the last night before they had to return to the city, a storm rolled in. They were in bed when the first drops hit the windows, and Natalie felt Henrik tense slightly beside her. Old habits? She asked gently. Old habits, he confirmed. Then he relaxed, pulling her closer. But I'm here where I want to be, not out standing guard, not watching storm coverage, not reliving the past, just here with you. That's growth. That's love. He kissed her temple. You've healed me, Natalie. I didn't think it was possible, but you did it. We healed each other. I was broken too, just in a different way. They fell asleep to the sound of rain, both of them content and unafraid, and when morning came, the world was washed clean and bright. The wedding took place 6 months later in the spring, in the gardens of Ravensworth, because nowhere else could accommodate all the guests they wanted to include. Elena had helped plan it, working with Natalie to blend vampire formality with human warmth, and the result was something magical. Natalie walked down an aisle lined with those strange blue silver flowers from the vampire realm, her father on one arm and Elena on the other, while Henrik waited at the end with an expression so full of love it made her want to cry. He wore traditional vampire formal wear, all elegant lines and dark fabric that made his pale skin and white hair look luminous, and when she reached him, he took her hands like she was something holy. The ceremony was conducted in both English and the old vampire tongue, promises exchanged that bound them in ways both legal and mystical. When they kissed, the assembled crowd, vampire nobles and human friends alike, erupted in applause, and Natalie felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception lasted until dawn, full of dancing and food and speeches that ranged from touching to hilarious. Elena gave a toast that started dignified and ended with embarrassing stories about Henrik's early days as king. Natalie's father welcomed Henrik to the family with obvious emotion. Even some of the more stuffy vampire council members seemed to enjoy themselves, which Elena assured her was unprecedented. At some point near the end, Henrik pulled her away from the crowd to a quiet corner of the garden. The sky was lightening toward dawn, and he had to leave soon before the sun rose too high. Happy? He asked. Ridiculously happy. She leaned into him, feeling the pleasant ache of dancing for hours. This was perfect. You're perfect. He tipped her face up, kissed her softly. My wife. My husband. She grinned at how strange and wonderful the word sounded. The vampire king. Former vampire king, currently just an art history student with a very patient wife. I love you. I love you more than I thought possible. more than I ever loved anything or anyone. He rested his forehead against hers. Thank you for not giving up on me, for teaching me to live again. Thank you for appearing during that first storm, for being stubborn and honorable and willing to change. They stood there as the sky turned pink and gold until Elena came to usher Henrik inside before the sun could harm him. Natalie watched him go, her husband, her future, and felt nothing but certainty. The years that followed were the happiest of Natalie's life. She and Henrik built a life that straddled both worlds, spending time in Ravensworth when vampire politics demanded it, but mostly living in the human realm in their house on the edge of the city with frequent trips to the mountain cabin. Henrik thrived in university, eventually completing his bachelor's and moving on to graduate studies. Watching him present his thesis on Renaissance art to a room full of professors who had no idea they were listening to someone who'd actually met Michelangelo was one of Natalie's favorite memories. Her clinic continued to grow. She opened 2 more locations, and the shelter expanded to house nearly 50 animals at a time. It was exhausting, fulfilling work, and Henrik supported her through every challenge and celebrated every victory. They traveled constantly vampire realms in Tokyo and London and Cairo, human cities they explored together. They collected experiences and memories the way some people collected art, building a shared history that felt precious and permanent. True to their agreement, 5 years after the wedding, Natalie told Henrik she was ready. The ritual took place in Ravensworth, deep in the ancient chambers beneath the palace where vampire magic ran strongest. Elena and a council of elders performed the ceremony, and Henrik held Natalie through every painful, terrifying moment of her transformation. It took 3 days. 3 days of fire in her veins and death in her lungs and Henrik's voice in her ear, anchoring her, reminding her why she'd chosen this. When she finally opened her eyes, the world had changed. Everything was sharper, clearer, more vivid. She could hear conversations happening rooms away, could smell individual scents she'd never distinguished before, could feel the magic thrumming through the stones around her. And she was hungry, with an intensity that frightened her. Henrik was there immediately, helping her through the first feeding, teaching her control, showing her how to navigate her new existence with patience and humor. Elena brought her clothes suited for her new status vampire royalty, the king's wife, someone who would live for centuries and needed to look the part. The adjustment was harder than Natalie had anticipated. There were days when she mourned her humanity, when the weight of immortality felt crushing. But Henrik was always there, understanding in a way only someone who'd lived it could be, and slowly she found her footing in this new life. 10 years after her transformation, Natalie stood in the gardens of Ravensworth during a summer evening, watching Henrik paint near the fountain. He'd set up his easel in the fading light, capturing the play of shadows on water, and she took a moment just to appreciate him. 20 years together, 15 as a vampire, and he still looked at her like she was the greatest miracle he'd ever witnessed. The guilt that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet contentment that radiated from him like warmth. He was happy. They both were. "You're staring," he said without looking up from his canvas. "I'm admiring," she corrected, moving closer. "There's a difference." He made a final stroke, then set down his brush and turned to face her. "I was thinking about that first night, when you told me you hated being alone on rainy nights. That was a lifetime ago. Several lifetimes, actually. And yet it feels recent." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head on his chest. "I appeared at every storm after that like it was my sacred duty. I was so certain I was protecting you that I was preventing another tragedy." "You were haunted," she said gently. "We both were, in our own ways. But you healed me. You refused to let me hide behind guilt and vigilance. You demanded I choose joy." His arms tightened around her. "Best demand anyone ever made of me. And now here we are, married, immortal, disgustingly happy." "Disgustingly," he agreed, laughter in his voice. "Elena says we're nauseating to be around. Elena is jealous. Probably." They stood there as twilight deepened into night, comfortable in the silence, and Natalie reflected on how far they'd come. From that rainy evening when a lonely veterinarian confessed her fears to a stranger, to this moment in a vampire garden with forever stretching ahead of them. "Do you still hate being alone on rainy nights?" Henrik asked suddenly. Natalie pulled back to look at him. I'm never alone on rainy nights, or clear ones, or any night, because I have you. You'll always have me." He cupped her face in his hands. "In storms and sunshine, in joy and sorrow, in this life and whatever comes after, you have me completely and eternally. And you have me, my stubborn, protective, beautiful vampire king." "Former king," he corrected. "Always my king," she countered. He kissed her as the stars emerged overhead, and when they broke apart, she saw nothing but love in his ancient eyes. Love and peace and the profound contentment of someone who'd finally let go of the past and embraced the future. That night, a storm rolled in. They were in their chambers when the rain started, and Henrik glanced at the window with his old instinctive tension. But then he looked back at Natalie, and his expression cleared. "Just rain," he said. "Just rain," she agreed. They curled up together in their massive bed, listening to the storm rage outside, and Natalie felt nothing but gratitude for the rainy night that had brought them together, for Henrik's persistent protection that had transformed into genuine love, for her own courage in demanding more than vigilance, for all the choices that had led them here. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you," he whispered back, "in every storm and every calm, forever." And forever stretched ahead of them, no longer frightening or lonely, but full of possibility and promise. They'd found each other in the rain, but they'd built their life in all the clear nights after, and that was the greatest gift either of them had ever received. Outside, the storm continued, but inside they were warm and safe and home. Two souls who'd healed each other and would face eternity together, one beautiful moment at a time.